The sun was setting over the quiet suburbs of Denver, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside a modest house on Maple Avenue, Daniel sat at the dining table, his fingers tapping nervously on the wood. Across from him sat his wife, Emily, calm, composed, but firm. "Daniel," she said softly but with an edge in her voice, "we've talked about this before. Your father needs more care than we can give him. He forgets things, he wanders off, and I can't handle it anymore." Daniel's eyes flickered with conflict. "Emily, he's my father. I can't just send him away. That house, it's for people who have no one." Emily sighed, her patience wearing thin. "It's not like you're abandoning him. You're just making sure he's cared for properly. The staff there knows how to handle people like him." Daniel looked toward the living room, where an old man and his father, Robert, sat staring at a faded photograph in his hands. His once strong frame was now frail, his eyes clouded but gentle. Daniel's throat tightened. He remembered those same hands building his first treehouse, teaching him to ride a bike, fixing things around the house, and now those same hands trembled as Robert tried to remember names and faces. "Dad?" Daniel called gently. Robert looked up, smiling. "Danny, my boy, you're home early today." Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, Dad, Emily made your favorite, chicken soup." Robert chuckled softly. "You know, your mother used to make that too. Always said it warms the soul." Emily glanced at Daniel, her expression unreadable. Dinner passed in uneasy silence. Robert tried to make conversation, telling half-finished stories about the old neighborhood. But Daniel's mind was elsewhere, torn between love and guilt. That night, as he helped his father to bed, Robert placed a trembling hand on Daniel's. "You've always been a good son. Danny, your mom would be proud." Daniel swallowed hard, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Get some rest, Dad." When Robert closed his eyes, Daniel stood in the doorway, his heart heavy. Emily's words echoed in his head. "He'll be fine there. It's for the best." And by morning, the decision was made. The next morning arrived cloaked in silence. The sky was gray, and a cool wind brushed against the leaves outside. Daniel stood by the front door, suitcase in hand, while Robert sat quietly on the couch, his favorite hat resting on his knee. "Where are we going, son?" Robert asked, his voice light and trusting, the way a child might ask before a trip. Daniel hesitated. "We're going for a short drive, Dad. Somewhere peaceful. You'll like it." Robert smiled, unaware of the weight those words carried. "Ah, a drive? It's been a while since you and I went out together. Remember when we used to drive up to the lake every summer?" Daniel nodded faintly. "Yeah, I remember." Emily walked out of the kitchen, her arms folded. "You should leave soon, Daniel. It's a long way out of town." He didn't reply, just gave a short nod and turned back toward his father. "Come on, Dad, let's go." Robert moved slowly, leaning on his cane as Daniel helped him into the car. The moment Daniel started the engine, a lump formed in his throat. His father's soft humming, an old tune he used to sing while working in the garage, filled the air, cutting through the heavy silence. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The road stretched endlessly ahead, winding through fields and quiet neighborhoods. Every few minutes, Robert would point out something along the way. "Oh, look there. That's an oak tree. Just like the one we had in our backyard, remember, Danny?" Daniel forced a small smile. "Yeah, Dad, I remember." The drive felt longer than usual, though the distance wasn't much. When the old house finally came into view, a large, quiet building surrounded by tall pine trees, Daniel felt his stomach twist. It wasn't what he'd imagined. The place looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. A few elderly people sat on benches under the shade, some talking, others simply staring into the distance. Robert looked around curiously. "What's this place, Danny?" "It looks nice." Daniel parked the car and stepped out slowly. "It's a place where you can rest. Dad, there are people here who'll take good care of you." Robert's brow furrowed for a moment. "Oh, am I staying here?" Daniel swallowed hard, unable to meet his father's eyes. "Just for a while, Dad. You'll like it here. They have good food, a garden, even music nights." Robert chuckled softly. "Music nights? Well, that sounds fun." Inside, a kind-looking nurse welcomed them, taking Robert's suitcase. She smiled warmly. "We'll take good care of him, Mr. Collins." Daniel nodded, but his voice failed him. He turned to his father, trying to smile. "I'll visit you soon, Dad." Robert reached out, his old, wrinkled hand trembling slightly. "Don't worry, son. I'll be fine. You've got your own life to live now." As Daniel hugged him, he felt a single tear escape, one he couldn't hold back anymore. When he finally stepped out and closed the car door behind him, the sound of it echoed in his heart like a goodbye. But he didn't know that one day that same door would open again and everything would change. When Daniel returned home, the silence was unbearable. The house felt bigger, colder, as if something living had been taken away. Robert's favorite chair sat empty, the old blanket folded neatly on the armrest, and the faint smell of his father's aftershave still lingered in the air. Emily tried to keep things normal. She placed flowers on the table and said cheerfully, "It'll take a few days to adjust, Daniel. Don't overthink it." He didn't answer. He walked into the living room and turned on the television, but even the noise couldn't drown out the silence. The laughter, the humming, the gentle, "Danny, come help me with this," were gone. That night, as Daniel lay awake, memories began to surface like ghosts. His father teaching him to tie his shoelaces, fixing his broken toys, holding him close after his mother's funeral. He turned on his side, staring at the ceiling. "Did I do the right thing?" he thought. "Or did I just make it easier for myself?" The next morning, he sat at the breakfast table, untouched toast in front of him. Emily noticed. "You didn't eat much yesterday either," she said softly. "You can visit him this weekend, okay?" Daniel looked up, his eyes heavy with guilt. "Yeah, maybe." But days turned into weeks. Work got busier. Life moved on, or at least that's what he told himself. Yet every time he passed the living room, that empty chair seemed to look back at him, accusingly silent. One evening, while he was sorting through old boxes in the attic, Daniel found an album. Inside were photos of his childhood, his father holding him in front of the lake, teaching him to ride his first bike, and one picture where they both had matching smiles and dirt-streaked faces from fixing an old car. He stared at that photo for a long time. Then, slowly, tears blurred his vision. Emily came upstairs quietly and saw him sitting there, holding the picture. "Daniel?" she whispered. He didn't respond at first. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. "He gave everything for me, Em. He worked 2 jobs after Mom died just to keep me in school. And now he's sitting alone in that place because I didn't have the courage to fight for him." Emily knelt beside him, her eyes softening. "You did what you thought was right. You can still make it right, Daniel. Visit him tomorrow. He'll be happy to see you?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, tomorrow." But tomorrow never seemed to come. Each morning brought new excuses, meetings, traffic exhaustion, until one day he realized it had been almost 2 months since he last saw his father. And then that night, he had a dream. He saw his father sitting alone in the garden of the old house, laughing quietly, not in sadness but in peace. When Daniel tried to call out to him, Robert only smiled and said, "Don't worry, Danny, I've been here before." Daniel woke up suddenly, heart pounding. What did he mean by that? Something inside him told him it was time. It was time to go back. The morning sun was just beginning to rise when Daniel started the car. The city was quiet, wrapped in mist, as he drove toward the outskirts where the old house stood. For the first time in weeks, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, a mix of fear and hope. He hadn't told Emily he was going. He just left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm going to see Dad." The drive felt longer this time. Every familiar landmark from his last visit seemed different, lonelier. When he finally pulled into the gravel driveway of the old house, he sat there for a while, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart heavy with guilt. A few elderly residents were sitting outside, reading newspapers or feeding birds. The same nurse from before noticed him and smiled faintly. "Mr. Collins," she greeted, "it's good to see you again. Your father has been waiting for you." Her words hit Daniel like a knife. "Waiting for you." He followed her through the quiet hallways, each step echoing on the tiled floor. Pictures of smiling residents lined the walls, but Daniel could only think of one face. When they reached the garden door, the nurse paused. "He spends most of his time here now. Says it reminds him of home." Daniel nodded and stepped outside. There, under a large oak tree, sat Robert, his father, wearing the same hat, a soft smile on his lips, and a small bird perched on his hand. Daniel froze. His father looked peaceful, almost radiant. The morning sun touched his face, and for a moment, Daniel just watched. Then Robert turned his head slowly, his smile widening. "Danny, my boy!" "You finally made it." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, Dad. I'm sorry it took so long." Robert chuckled lightly. "Time doesn't move the same here, son. You'd be surprised how fast days go by when you've got the sun, some birds, and old memories to keep you company." Daniel sat beside him on the bench. "How have you been?" Robert sighed softly. "Better than I thought I'd be. At first, I didn't understand why you brought me here. I thought maybe I did something wrong. But then I remembered, this place felt familiar." Daniel frowned. "Familiar?" Robert's eyes softened with a faraway look. "Yeah, I couldn't place it at first. But yesterday it came to me. This is the same place where I came 20 years ago." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Robert smiled gently. 20 years ago, I came here to pick you up. Danny, you were sitting right there under that same tree. You'd gotten lost after your mother's funeral, remember? I found you crying, saying you wanted to stay here because it was quiet and peaceful." Daniel's mouth fell open. His eyes filled with tears. He remembered that day faintly like a dream. His father had found him, carried him home and told him, "You're never alone as long as I'm alive." And now all these years later, Daniel had brought his father back to that same place, to leave him behind. Robert laughed softly, looking up at the sky. "Life has a funny way of coming full circle, doesn't it?" Daniel couldn't speak. He just stared, tears falling silently. Daniel sat frozen on the bench beside his father, his heart pounding as Robert's words echoed in his mind. "This is the same place where I came to pick you up 20 years ago." The air around them felt heavy, the kind of silence that holds memories, too deep for words. The chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the distant laughter of other residents all faded into the background. Daniel swallowed hard. "Dad, I didn't know. I didn't remember." Robert smiled kindly. "You were just a boy. You'd lost your mom. I remember finding you sitting under this tree crying your heart out. You said you didn't want to go home because home didn't feel the same anymore." Daniel's eyes blurred with tears. "And you came for me." Robert nodded. "Of course I did. You're my son. I told you that day, remember? I said, you'll never be alone as long as I'm here." Daniel's chest tightened. "But I left you here, Dad. I broke that promise." Robert chuckled softly, his wrinkled hand resting gently on Daniel's shoulder. "No, son. You didn't break anything. You just forgot for a little while. Life makes us forget sometimes. The world keeps us busy, jobs, bills, responsibilities, but it doesn't change what's in your heart." Daniel looked down, his voice cracking. "You trusted me, and I failed you." Robert shook his head. "You didn't fail me, Danny. I'm proud of you. You became the man I hoped you'd be, strong, responsible, caring. You made choices that weren't easy. That's life." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "Then why does it hurt so much?" Robert smiled faintly. "Because you still love me. And love, my boy, is what keeps us human." Daniel wiped his tears, but more followed. He took his father's hand, frail and trembling, but still warm. "I can't leave you here anymore, Dad. You belong with me. At home." Robert looked at him, his eyes filled with quiet peace. "Are you sure, son?" Emily might not be too happy about that. Daniel gave a broken laugh through his tears. "I don't care what anyone thinks anymore. You're coming home." Robert's smile grew. "Well, I never thought I'd get fired from a retirement home." They both laughed softly, the tension melting for a brief, beautiful moment. But as Daniel stood and helped his father up, the nurse who had been watching from afar approached them. "Mr. Collins, are you sure about this?" she asked gently. "Your father has settled in well here." Daniel nodded firmly. "He's going home with me. That's where he belongs." The nurse smiled, sensing the conviction in his tone. "Then I'll help you with the paperwork." Robert looked at Daniel as they walked back toward the building. "You know, Danny," he said quietly, "I never stopped believing you'd come back for me. Just like I came for you that day." Daniel stopped in his tracks, his eyes welling up again. "You remembered that all this time?" Robert smiled. A father never forgets the moments that define his love. And in that instant, Daniel realized that the man beside him, frail, old and slow, had given him more strength, love and faith than he could ever repay. The drive back home felt entirely different this time. The same road that had seemed endless and heavy weeks ago now felt alive, every mile filled with quiet redemption. Daniel glanced at his father in the passenger seat. Robert was looking out the window, smiling softly as the wind brushed against his face. "It's been a while since I've been on this road," Robert said with a chuckle. "It feels familiar." Daniel smiled faintly. "It should. It's the same road you used to take me on when we went fishing." Robert laughed, a sound that filled the car like sunlight. "Ah, yes, you always threw the bait wrong." Daniel laughed too, though his heart ached. "And you always fixed it for me." For a few moments, they drove in silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Robert's eyes widened slightly. "Home," he whispered almost to himself. "I didn't think I'd see this place again." Daniel turned off the engine and smiled. "You're never leaving it again, Dad?" But before they could get out, the front door opened. Emily stood there, frozen in shock. "Daniel, what is this?" Daniel stepped out of the car and walked around to help his father. "This," he said firmly, "is my father. And he's coming home." Emily's eyes widened. "Daniel, we talked about this. He needs professional care. You can't just—" Daniel interrupted, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "No, Emily, what he needs is love. What he needs is his family. I left him once and it broke me. I won't do it again." Robert stood quietly beside him, leaning on his cane, his expression gentle. "Emily, my dear," he said softly, "I don't want to be a burden. If it's too hard—" Emily hesitated, her anger fading into guilt as she looked at his frail, kind face. "No, Mr. Collins, it's not that. I just didn't think—" Daniel took a deep breath, his voice trembling now. "He built this home with his own hands. Emily, every wall, every nail, every piece of it carries his sweat and love. I can't leave him in a place full of strangers while I sleep, under the roof he made for me." Tears filled Emily's eyes. She looked at Daniel, then at Robert, the man who had never said a harsh word to her, who always smiled even when she was impatient with him. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "He can stay." Robert's eyes glistened. "Thank you, sweetheart." They stepped inside together. Robert's gaze roamed the house, the photos on the wall, the smell of the wood, the faint ticking of the old clock. "It hasn't changed much," he said softly. Daniel smiled. "It didn't feel right without you." As Robert sat down in his favorite chair, the one that had been empty for so long, he sighed deeply, a peaceful smile spreading across his face. "Feels good to be home." Daniel knelt beside him, placing a hand on his father's arm. "It feels good to have you home, Dad." Robert looked at him, eyes filled with warmth. "You know, son, life always brings us back to where we truly belong." And for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt that truth deep within his soul. The following days brought a quiet joy that Daniel hadn't felt in years. The house no longer felt empty. The sound of Robert's slow footsteps, his gentle humming, and his soft laughter began to fill the air again, like old music returning to a forgotten melody. Every morning, Daniel would help his father out to the porch. They'd sit together with coffee mugs in hand, watching the sun rise over the street. Robert would tell stories from his younger days about fixing cars, courting Daniel's mother, and how he built the house nail by nail. "You know," Robert said one morning, smiling faintly, "when I built that fence, your mother said it was crooked. I told her, 'So what if it's crooked?' It's ours." Daniel laughed. "Yeah, that sounds like you." Those conversations became Daniel's peace. Every word his father spoke felt like a lesson he'd forgotten, a truth about love, patience, and the things that truly matter. Emily watched from the kitchen window some mornings. At first, she didn't say much, but slowly, even her heart began to soften. She saw the way Daniel smiled now, genuine, warm, free of guilt. And she realized something she hadn't before. Robert's presence didn't take away from their life. It added meaning to it. One afternoon, Daniel came home from work to find Emily and Robert sitting together, laughing over an old photo album. "Oh, look at this one," Emily said, holding up a picture. Daniel in a Halloween costume, a tiny pirate. Robert chuckled. "He cried the whole night because his hat was itchy." Daniel stopped in the doorway, watching them with a soft smile. For the first time, his home felt whole again. No tension, no distance, just family. Later that evening, Daniel helped his father to bed. As he adjusted the blanket, Robert reached out and took his hand. "You did good, son," Robert whispered. "You made things right." Daniel's throat tightened. "I should have done it sooner." Robert smiled. "Maybe, but the important thing is you did it. That's what matters." As Daniel turned off the lamp, Robert added quietly, "You know, Danny, sometimes life takes things away just so we remember their value. I hope you never forget that." Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening. "I won't, Dad, not ever." He sat beside the bed for a while, watching his father drift off to sleep. The room felt warm, peaceful, filled with love instead of regret. When Daniel finally stepped out into the hallway, Emily was standing there. She smiled softly. "He's happy," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, and so am I." Emily took his hand. "You were right, Daniel. This house, it needed him." Daniel looked back toward the room where his father slept and whispered, "No, Emily, I needed him." The days that followed were peaceful, filled with laughter, warmth, and quiet understanding. But as autumn began to settle over the neighborhood, Daniel started noticing small changes in his father. Robert's steps grew slower. His voice, once steady and strong, became softer, sometimes trembling mid-sentence. The mornings that once began with cheerful talks on the porch now often started with silence, broken only by the chirping of birds and the sound of the wind brushing through the trees. One morning, Daniel found Robert sitting quietly by the window, staring out at the falling leaves. "Dad," he said gently, "you okay?" Robert smiled faintly. "I was just watching the trees let go. Danny, they do it every year without a fight. Maybe that's what getting old is. Learning to let go peacefully." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. "Don't say that, Dad." Robert chuckled softly. "Why not? It's the truth. I've had a long, full life. A good son, a loving wife, and now peace. That's all a man can ask for." Daniel sat beside him, unable to find words. He wanted to tell his father that he wasn't ready, not to lose him, not again. But Robert just placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "I know what you're thinking," he said softly. "But don't waste your heart on fear. Just be with me." That's enough. Over the next few weeks, Robert's health continued to decline. Emily and Daniel took turns caring for him, feeding him, helping him move, reading him his favorite books. The house that once echoed, with his laughter now carried the quiet rhythm of compassion and prayer. One evening, Emily found Daniel sitting by his father's bedside, holding his hand. Robert's breathing was slow but calm. Daniel whispered, "Do you remember when I was little and I got lost at the park?" Robert smiled faintly, eyes half open. "I remember. You were hiding under that big oak tree, crying." Daniel nodded. "And you found me. You always found me." Robert's lips curved into a small smile. "A father always does." Daniel's tears fell silently. "What am I supposed to do when I can't find you anymore, Dad?" Robert opened his eyes just enough to look at him. "You'll find me here," he whispered, gently tapping Daniel's chest. "Right where you keep your love." That night, Daniel sat beside him long after he fell asleep, holding his father's hand, afraid to let go. Emily stood in the doorway, watching quietly. She walked over, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, and whispered, "He's peaceful, Daniel. He knows he's home." Daniel nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, he's home." And for the first time, he understood the true meaning of those words. Not just a place, but a feeling, a love, a circle that never truly breaks. The winter air had grown colder, and the world outside seemed to move more slowly, as if time itself respected the silence that had settled over Robert's home. The nights were long and filled with memories, but Daniel never left his father's side. One morning, the soft light of dawn filtered through the curtains. Daniel was still half asleep, sitting in the chair beside Robert's bed. He had spent the whole night there, listening to his father's uneven breathing. "Danny?" The faint whisper broke through the quiet. Daniel instantly leaned forward, clutching his father's hand. "I'm here, Dad. I'm right here." Robert smiled weakly. His eyes were tired, but still filled with love. Do you remember that day? You brought me back from the old house? Daniel nodded, his eyes wet. Yes, Dad, I'll never forget it. Robert took a shallow breath. That day I saw my boy become a man. You brought me home, just like I once brought you home. Life comes full circle, doesn't it? Daniel pressed his father's hand to his forehead. I'm sorry for everything, Dad, for leaving you there, for hurting you. Robert gently shook his head. No, son, don't carry guilt. What matters is that you came back. You learned what love really means. And that's more than enough. Tears rolled down Daniel's face. I wish I could give you more time. Robert smiled faintly. Time is never ours to give, son. But love. Love lasts beyond it. He coughed lightly, then whispered, Promise me one thing, Danny. Anything, Dad. Be the kind of father. Your father tried to be. Daniel nodded through tears. I will, I promise. Robert's breathing grew slower. His eyes wandered toward the window where the sunlight fell gently on the curtains. It's beautiful, he murmured. Just like your mother used to say. The light always finds its way in. His fingers tightened slightly around Daniel's hand, and then relaxed. Daniel froze. The room felt still, painfully still. Dad? He whispered, his voice trembling. Dad. Emily walked in quietly, her eyes already filling with tears. She placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. He's gone, Daniel, she said softly. He's at peace now. Daniel leaned down, pressing his forehead to his father's hand, his sobs muffled by grief. You'll always be with me, Dad, he whispered. Always. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, bathing the house in a warm, golden glow. It was as if the heavens themselves had opened their arms to welcome a good man home. For Daniel, it was the most painful moment of his life. And yet, somewhere in his heart, he felt a quiet peace. His father had left, yes, but his love, his words, his warmth, they would never fade. The days after Robert's passing felt heavy, like a storm that refused to clear. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every sound reminded Daniel of his father, the creak of the old rocking chair, the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of laughter that no longer echoed through the halls. He often found himself standing by the window where his father used to sit, staring out at the same view of the garden. The bench where Robert had once read books or fed the birds now stood empty, a silent witness to a lifetime of love and sacrifice. Emily watched him with concern. Daniel, she said softly one evening, you've got to let him rest now. Daniel turned to her, eyes glistening. I know, but every corner of this house feels like him. I keep thinking he'll walk in any moment and say, Danny, let's go for a drive. Emily smiled sadly. He's still here, Daniel, just not the way you can touch or see. He's in everything you do. Every kind thing, every honest decision. That's him living through you. Her words lingered in Daniel's heart. That night, as he sat alone in the living room, he found his father's old journal on the shelf, worn, faded, and full of handwritten notes. He opened it gently. On the first page was a quote written in Robert's shaky handwriting. A father's duty is not to live forever. It's to live in the heart of his child. Daniel's hands trembled as he read through the pages. Stories of his childhood, lessons about patience, notes about love, even prayers for Daniel's happiness. He didn't know his father had written all this. It was like hearing his voice again, guiding him from beyond the world of the living. One entry caught his eye. If ever my son loses his way, I pray he finds his strength not in pride but in kindness. Daniel closed the journal, pressing it against his chest. I won't lose my way, Dad, he whispered. I'll make you proud. The next morning, he decided to act on his promise. He took a portion of his savings and began visiting the local nursing home, the same kind of place where he had once abandoned his father. But this time, he came with purpose. He talked with the elderly residents, listened to their stories, brought them food and books, and sometimes just sat quietly beside them, offering the kind of companionship his father had longed for. Soon, he started a small foundation in his father's name, the Robert Home Project, dedicated to helping lonely elders find comfort, care, and dignity in their final years. Each time he saw a smile light up an old face, Daniel felt his father's spirit around him, calm, proud, eternal. And every evening when the sun set behind the house, Daniel would whisper, You were right. Dad, love really does last beyond time. Years passed, yet Robert's memory lived on, not as a shadow of sorrow, but as a light that guided Daniel's every step. The Robert Home Project grew into something far greater than he had imagined. What started as one small building became a network of warm, welcoming homes for the elderly across the city. Daniel was no longer the man who once walked away from love and responsibility. He had become the man his father had dreamed he'd be, humble, kind, and full of compassion. One cold winter morning, Daniel arrived at one of the homes to check on the residents. As he walked through the hallway, he noticed a small boy sitting beside an elderly woman, carefully feeding her soup. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Daniel smiled and approached him. "Hey there, buddy. What's your name?" The boy looked up with shy eyes. "Eli," he said softly. "My mom works here, so I come after school. I like helping the old people. They tell me stories." Daniel chuckled. "That's very kind of you, Eli. Not many kids your age would do that." The boy shrugged, smiling a little. "Grandpa used to tell me that helping others keeps your heart clean." For a moment, Daniel's chest tightened. Those words echoed almost exactly what his own father had said to him years ago. He knelt down beside the boy. "Your grandpa sounds like a wise man." Eli nodded. "Yeah, but he's gone now. Sometimes I still talk to him, though. Mom says he can hear me in heaven." Daniel felt a tear gather in his eye, but quickly smiled. "I think your mom's right, kiddo. Grandpas have a way of listening, even from up there." Eli looked thoughtful. "Do you have a grandpa?" Daniel smiled softly. "I did. And I still talk to him, too." The boy grinned. "Then maybe they're friends up there." Daniel laughed, his heart warming at the thought. "Yeah, maybe they are." As the boy returned to helping the old woman, Daniel stood there quietly for a moment, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. Life truly had come full circle. From a son who once turned away from his father, to a man who now carried his father's love into the world. That evening, Daniel sat on the same porch where his father once sat, watching the sunset. He opened Robert's journal again, now worn from years of reading. There was one final line he hadn't noticed before, written faintly at the bottom of the last page. "If love is passed on, a father never really dies." Daniel closed the journal, smiling through his tears. The sky turned golden, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine, the same scent that had filled his childhood home. He whispered into the fading light, "You never died, Dad. You just became a part of everything good in me." Years had gone by, and Daniel had grown older, his hair now touched with gray, and his face lined with the kind of calm that only comes from a life well lived. The world had changed, but one thing remained constant: the lessons his father had left behind. Every year, on the same day his father had passed, Daniel would visit the hilltop cemetery where Robert rested. It wasn't a place of sadness for him anymore. It was a place of gratitude, a quiet reminder of where love begins and never ends. That morning, the sky was bright, the air crisp. Daniel walked slowly toward his father's grave, holding a small bunch of fresh white lilies, Robert's favorite flowers. He knelt down, brushing away the fallen leaves from the headstone that read, "Robert Miller, a father, a teacher, a light that never fades." Daniel placed the flowers gently at the base of the stone. "Hey, Dad," he whispered, smiling softly. "Your foundation's helping more people than I ever dreamed. You'd be proud of what you started, of what we started." He sat there quietly, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. "You know, there's this boy named Eli. Reminds me of myself when I was young, stubborn, curious, full of questions. But he's got that same kindness you taught me to see in people. He makes me believe that the world still has hope." Daniel chuckled lightly. "Sometimes I catch myself saying your words. Dad, those same old sayings I once rolled my eyes at. Guess I finally understand them now." He looked up at the open sky, his voice trembling slightly. "I used to think I lost you that day." "But I didn't. You never left. You've been right here all along, in my heart. In my choices, in every life I've touched." The wind seemed to whisper through the trees, and for a brief moment, Daniel could almost hear his father's gentle laughter. Warm, familiar, comforting. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of peace. "Thank you, Dad," he said softly. "For everything. for teaching me what love truly means." He stood, took one last look at the stone, and smiled. The sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the grave, almost as if heaven itself was smiling back. As Daniel walked back down the path, Eli came running toward him, waving excitedly. "Mr. Daniel, the new home's opening today. Everyone's waiting for you." Daniel laughed and placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then let's not keep them waiting, huh?" Together, they walked down the hill, the old man and the young boy, two hearts connected by love passed through generations. And as they disappeared into the golden light of afternoon, Daniel glanced up at the sky and whispered one last time, "Goodbye, Dad. Till we meet again." The wind carried his words away, and not as a farewell, but as a promise. Because love, once given, never dies. It simply lives on forever.